Hi, I've decided to create this video to give you an example of the way that a close reading works. I know that there was a reading on close reading just last week, but even though it might have covered some of the theoretical aspects of it, it isn't always clear how to go ahead and do one. So what I've done is construct a close reading of The Charge of the Light Brigade. You'll find that poem in the readings folder of our project folder on Blackboard. I recommend opening up the poem and following along. It's not very long. We're talking about a total of 6 stanzas, so you could even read it first in order to really make sure that you know what we're talking about here. My close reading will be structured based on stanzas, so there will be 6 sections of it overall. To begin, in stanza 1, the first 3 lines of the poem are the sorts of statements that we have all used to push ourselves forward when we are already tired, a militarized version of, quote, just a little further, you can make it, just go a little further. These lines place us into the soldiers' heads and prepare us for the tension that we will find in subsequent stanzas between the soldiers' sense of duty and the growing awareness that something is wrong with the orders they've been given. These lines establish and emphasize the relatively small distance the British Light Brigade troops, that is, lightly armed, thinly armored troops on horseback, would cover during their ill-fated march. There is an epic sense of inevitability about these lines. The events in them were just as fated to happen as were the events that would end the battle. Repetition of the words "rode the 600" works to establish the initial number of soldiers, and by doing so, to foreshadow how much lower a number it would be by the end. In stanza 2, calling up the tension between soldier and commander that we became aware of in stanza 1, the text of the poem here asks, quote, "Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered." These lines invite the reader to put him or herself in the soldier's place, to experience the contradiction the poem suggests all soldiers must get through to do their duty at one point or another, struggling with the growing conviction that the orders he or she has been given are flawed, though a soldier is expected to follow orders first and foremost. Was there a man dismayed? Of course, probably almost 600 of them, and all were expected to do what they were told without offering any response or question, even if it was clear to everyone that those orders would end in death. Stanza 3. In these lines, we continue to see the events of the battle from the perspective of one of the soldiers of the Light Brigade. The sense of despair conjured up by the wording is accentuated when one recalls the meager armaments of the soldiers of the Light Brigade, compared to the surrounding cannons, which, quote, stormed at them with shot and shell. The palpable despair of the first 5 lines of the poem becomes a sense of the perverse when the soldiers are described as riding boldly and well into the mouth of hell. In the stanza, the mention of the 600 gives the mouth of hell its proportion. To fit all those men in and swallow them up indicates an even larger, more gaping maw than the reader would have imagined at first. Stanza 4. The flashing of the Light Brigade sabers is the dominant image here. The sabers stand in contrast to the cannons surrounding the Light Brigade, and, as the soldiers press deeper into the thick black smoke that resulted from the firing of the cannons, the flashing sabers eventually become the only indicators of the British soldiers' presence. It is to this that the poem refers when we read that, quote, all the world wondered. The following 5 lines come only after the Light Brigade has plunged into the smoke so far and so deep that the rest of the world can only wonder what they are doing, at which point these lines become indicators of fantasy more than factual reporting. They call up the point of view that says that perhaps if the soldiers are in the smoke and we can still hear something happening, well, maybe they're doing better than we think they are. And then the smoke clears, and, quote, then they rode back, but not the 600. The repetition of not here suggests the surprised, even horrified reaction of the first person to see just how diminished the Light Brigade's numbers have become. Stanza 5. The first 5 lines of the stanza are the same as the first 5 lines of stanza 3, and call to mind the feeling of embarrassment that results from realizing that what we have thought was necessary wasn't worth the loss we suffered. Having, quote, fought so well, having come through the jaws of death, having come back from the mouth of hell, all of these celebrations of heroism become tired cliches, their impact tempered by how few of the soldiers actually did any of those things in the end. Perhaps 600 soldiers marched into the mouth of hell, but stanza 5 asks whether that action could have ever been the correct one given how few marched back out of it again. Stanza 6. To begin this last stanza of the poem with the question, when can their glory fade, is to call attention to the concept of glory and to posit the idea of faded glory as a necessary element of a soldier's existence after all the battles have come to the end and the fighting is over. But here, this variety of glory is due to the ill-fated charge. To ask when the glory will fade is to ask how long it will take before, quote, all the world, again made reference to in the stanza, will put out of their minds the epic tragedy and the horrors of the charge of the Light Brigade. The last lines of the poem tell us to honor the initial 600, to think on how heroic the charge could have been, and how great a victory could have been won when there were still 600 soldiers to do it. We are in this way given a formula for moving beyond the ignominy of the loss, but only until we see the parade of returning troops and find undeniably the case that how few of them are left.